In the last lesson, you tested your assistant by running it through a real piece of work. You followed its flow, noticed every moment where the interaction became effortful, where you had to steer it back on track, rephrase something it should have asked more clearly, or paste in context it should have already had, and came away with a list of friction points. This lesson is about what you do with those findings. And before we get into the how, it's worth flagging that this lesson is AI supported. Inside the program, you've got access to the AI Assistant Improver, a dedicated assistant built specifically for this stage of the process. It's there to help you take your testing observations, map them to specific problems in the instruction set or knowledge files, and work through targeted fixes without having to figure everything out manually. We'll come back to exactly how to use it throughout this lesson. The reason it matters is that iterating on an assistant involves a lot of information to hold in one go: the current instructions, the knowledge files, the testing notes, the proposed changes. Having an assistant like the Improver that can hold all of that and help you make targeted, structured improvements is what makes the iteration process genuinely fast. Okay, so for most assistants, the first version you build will almost always do a lot of the job it is supposed to do, and it also shows you where the gaps are. The friction you captured in testing it is exactly what you need to make the next version of it meaningfully better. Assistants become genuinely useful through a few rounds of testing and targeted improvement, and the goal of this lesson is to show you how to do that efficiently. When the assistant you've built produces something off, the most common instinct is to correct it inside the conversation. You add more detail, you rephrase the request, you steer it back, and eventually you get the output close enough to use. That can work for that one run, but it doesn't change the assistant. Next time you open a new conversation, the same friction will be there because the instructions and files haven't changed. What we're doing here is different. Instead of compensating for the gaps while you're using the assistant, you go back to the instruction set and the knowledge files and tighten them so the assistant handles those situations better by default. The goal is less steering on every run, not just on one run. To work out where to focus, it helps to understand how most assistants are actually structured. Most operate with 2 layers, and knowing which one has the problem points you to the right fix a lot faster. The first layer is the behavioral logic in the instructions, the tasks, the sequencing, the questions the assistant asks, and the rules it follows. The second layer is the supporting context in the knowledge files, the voice guidelines, examples, templates, and reference material the assistant draws on while it works. Sometimes the issue is in the logic of the first layer. Maybe a step is missing, or the assistant starts drafting before it's gathered enough information. Other times the right knowledge file exists, but the instructions never tell the assistant to use it at the relevant step in the workflow. And sometimes the second layer, the file or files themselves, is the problem. It's too vague, outdated, or doesn't give the assistant enough detail to produce something useful. When you look at a friction point from your testing, it helps to ask, is this a behavior issue, a context issue, or a connection issue between the two? The AI Assistant Improver can work through that question with you, give it the friction point and the current instruction set, and it will help you identify where the likely cause sits. That usually gets you to the right fix faster than trying to diagnose and rework everything at once. When you look at a friction point from your testing, it helps to ask, is this a behavior issue, a context issue, or a connection issue between the two? The AI Assistant Improver can work through that question with you, give it the friction point and the current instruction set, and it will help you identify where the likely cause sits. That usually gets you to the right fix faster than trying to diagnose and rework everything at once. Before you open the AI Assistant Improver, it helps to have your testing notes in front of you, not because there's a long list of things you need to prepare, but because you'll get more out of the process if you're not trying to recall what went wrong while you're in the middle of fixing it. You don't want to be making 3 changes to your assistant, jumping back in to use it, and then hitting the same roadblock the next time because you forgot to flag something important while you were in improvement mode. Okay, so let's look at the AI Assistant Improver. It will guide you through what it needs. It will ask for the instruction set, identify which knowledge files are already referenced in the instructions, and ask you to provide those too. You don't need to figure out upfront what to pull together. It surfaces what's relevant as you go. Once it has the context, share your testing observations. What worked, what broke, what felt rough, and any specific examples you captured. From there, the assistant carries out the analytical work, reviewing the instruction set, mapping your observations to likely causes, and proposing a prioritized list of fixes. Once you've agreed on which ones to apply, it walks you through each change in chat before making it. It explains what will change and where. You confirm you're happy, and then it applies the update to the working document. You don't need to do any of the rewriting yourself. What you do need to do is bring the evidence, decide which fixes to prioritize, and confirm each change feels right before it's applied. Just to reiterate, the practical loop goes like this. The improvement assistant reviews the instruction set and your notes, proposes a short list of fixes, and you work through them one at a time. Once all the changes have been made to the instructions and knowledge files, you rebuild the assistant and test it properly. The important thing throughout is that each change is the right contextual fix for the specific issue it's addressing, not just a plausible edit, but one that genuinely targets the root cause. And the reason this process works is that it's built around diagnosis rather than guesswork. Once you've shared your testing observations with the AI Assistant Improver, it will work through the likely causes with you, mapping what you saw to specific places in the instruction set or knowledge files where the issue probably originates. If the output felt generic, it might surface that the assistant started drafting before gathering enough context and point you to the task in the instructions where that happens. If the tone was off, it might identify that a voice guidelines file is referenced in the knowledge files, but not called at the right point in the workflow. You'll still need to apply your own judgment. You'll get to know what good looks like better than any tool can, but working through it this way gets you to a specific hypothesis rather than a vague sense that something needs fixing. Once you've got a list of fixes, the most thorough approach is to work through them one at a time, testing your assistant again, and then returning to the same improver chat to look at the next fix. It can feel slower in the moment, but it means you can be confident about exactly what each change is doing and why it addresses the issue. If something doesn't improve after you rebuild and test the assistant, you won't be trying to unpick which of several edits caused the problem. That said, if the fixes are genuinely targeted and distinct, each one clearly addressing a separate self-contained issue, it's reasonable to apply a batch of them together before testing. The key either way is that you're satisfied each change is the right contextual fix for the specific problem, not just a plausible edit that might help. Once you've worked through the high priority fixes, run a proper end-to-end test, the same kind of realistic scenario you used in the previous lesson, vary the inputs so you can see whether the assistant handles different situations more consistently. At this stage, the interaction should start to feel different, less steering, more reviewing. If the assistant still needs heavy intervention, there's usually something more structural to address, something in the opening, the task sequence, or how knowledge files are referenced. And it's worth going back to the improvement assistant with that as a specific question rather than trying to diagnose it manually. To recap, testing shows you where the assistant creates unnecessary effort. Improvement reduces that effort by tightening the upstream cause, which usually lives in the instruction set, sometimes in the knowledge files, and often in how the two connect. The AI Assistant Improver is there to carry the analytical and drafting side of that process. Your job is to bring the evidence, make the decisions, and work through fixes one at a time until the assistant performs consistently enough that your review feels like a final check rather than a rescue. So when you're ready, open the AI Assistant Improver. It will guide you through providing what it needs, the instruction set, the relevant knowledge files, and your testing observations. Ask it for a prioritized list of fixes, starting with the single change most likely to reduce friction on the next run. Work through that list, one change at a time, testing as you go. That brings us to the end of this part of the Building AI Assistance module. You went from choosing a real workflow to having a working assistant, one you've built, tested in real conditions, and improved based on what you found. Along the way, you learned how assistants are structured, how to give them the context they need, and how to diagnose what's going wrong when they don't perform the way you expect. What you can do now is repeat that cycle for any workflow you want to accelerate. Build, test, improve. Each assistant you build from here will be quicker to put together because you've already been through the full process and you know where the work actually sits. In the final lesson of this module, we'll introduce the assistants versus agents distinction and why it matters. You won't be building agents, just getting clear on what AI that acts actually means and how to think about it.